The village of Ijirima lay nestled between two silent hills, where time seemed to stretch long and slow like the shadows of dusk. Life moved with the rhythm of ancient drums, guided by elders and governed by traditions passed down like heirlooms. Outsiders said it was a peaceful place, where every man greeted with a nod, every woman knew her role, and every child was taught to obey. But beneath the woven roofs and behind the laughter of market days, there were secrets. And in this village where cruelty often wore the mask of culture, no secret was darker than the one that lived in Baba Gubra's house. Amina was born under the cry of a dying woman. Her mother, Halima, had gone into labor just as a thunderstorm rolled through Ijirima. By dawn, she had given her final breath, leaving behind a baby girl with large, questioning eyes and a trail of sorrow. Baba Gubra, a towering man with a voice like cracking wood, stood beside the body and declared the child a blessing. The villagers nodded, whispered prayers, and went home. No one asked how the blessing would be raised. Amina never knew softness. From the moment she could walk, she was treated as an unwanted obligation. Baba Gubra, who the villagers praised as a generous man, was anything but kind behind closed doors. Outside, he wore clean robes, offered kola nuts during meetings, and laughed loudest at the chief's jokes. Inside, he was a storm, unpredictable, unrelenting. Amina learned early that silence was safer than sound. She learned to step lightly, to breathe softly, to vanish into corners when his footsteps echoed across the mud floor. By age 5, Amina knew what hunger truly meant. Baba Gubra locked food away like it was treasure meant only for kings. He told her she must earn her meals, not by good behavior but by humiliation. If she wanted food, she had to crawl, on hands and knees, across the rough ground, like a dog. And if she looked at him while doing it, he would beat her with his belt. His words were sharp, his hands sharper. "A dog should not meet a man's gaze," he said once, after slapping her so hard she couldn't hear from her left ear for 2 days. Her body bore the proof of his cruelty. Her knees were always scabbed, the skin dark and calloused. Her back had lines like tree bark from all the lashes she took. Her voice, once bubbly like most children's, had grown small, delicate, unsure. She rarely spoke unless spoken to. But her eyes, her wide, dark, silent eyes, watched everything. She noticed how Baba Gubra's face tightened when he returned from meetings, how he hid things under his bed, how his moods changed with the moon. She listened more than she talked. She memorized every sound, every sigh, every crack in the wall. At night, when the village slept and even the crickets were tired, Amina would crawl to the tiny window in her room. The moon, her only friend, watched her with silver eyes. She whispered dreams to it, dreams she dared not say aloud. She imagined herself as a queen, not in flowing gowns, but in chains. Not a queen who ruled from thrones, but one who ruled herself, even when shackled. She did not dream of castles or riches. She dreamed of strength. The kind that could not be taken. The kind that survived. Beneath a loose floorboard in her room, she kept a secret. It was a drawing she had made with charcoal and spit, on a piece of sackcloth. It showed a woman kneeling, her hands bound in chains, but her head held high, wearing a crooked crown. The face looked nothing like Amina's, but in her heart, she knew it was her. No one had ever seen it. No one would understand. If Baba Gubra ever found it, he'd burn it and punish her for the crime of hope. She lived each day in quiet suffering. She fetched water, cleaned the compound, swept the floors, and cooked the yam he never let her eat. The neighbors never suspected anything. Sometimes they praised Baba Gubra for managing so well after his wife's death. When he passed by with his walking stick and strong stride, they bowed their heads. Amina often wondered how people could be so blind. Or maybe they weren't. Maybe they just didn't care. One morning, after sweeping the compound before sunrise, she returned inside to prepare his tea. She hadn't eaten since the day before. Her stomach growled softly, but she dared not show discomfort. Baba Gubra was asleep, snoring like thunder behind his closed door. She tiptoed into the kitchen and waited. If she was lucky, he'd leave before breakfast, and she could scrape whatever remained in the pot. He didn't leave. Not that morning. He stormed out of his room, grumbling about some missing money, blaming her, even though she'd never touched a coin in her life. He slapped her across the face and left without tea, shouting as he walked down the road. She knew what that meant: no food until tomorrow. Maybe longer. When the compound fell quiet, Amina crawled toward the kitchen again, trembling with hunger. She pressed her ear to the door. Silence. She crawled across the room, eyes searching for anything edible. She remembered the time she had found a half-burnt plantain skin in the ash bucket and ate it without thinking. But today, something strange caught her eye. As she passed by Baba Gubra's room, the door stood slightly open. That was rare. Very rare. She froze, unsure if it was a trap. But her hunger pulled her forward. Crawling like always, she pushed the door open wider and slid inside. The room smelled of old sweat and pepper soup. The bed was unmade. Amina's heart pounded. She crept toward the corner, where she knew he sometimes threw things under the bed. She reached under it, hoping for a forgotten biscuit wrapper or a fruit peel. Her fingers touched something soft, fabric. She pulled it out. It was a torn piece of wrapper cloth, stained with something dark. At first, she thought it was palm oil. But when she held it closer to the sunlight leaking through the cracks, she knew better. It was blood. Old, dried, but unmistakable. The pattern on the fabric was familiar. It wasn't hers. It didn't belong to Baba Gubra either. She had never seen it among their clothes. It was too fine, the print too bold for someone like her. Her breath caught. This cloth had belonged to someone else. Someone who wasn't supposed to be here. And it had been hidden under Baba Gubra's bed, soaked in blood. Amina stared at it, her mind spinning. For the first time in her life, her fear didn't freeze her. It sharpened her senses. Something was terribly wrong. And for the first time, crawling on her knees, she didn't feel like a dog. She felt like a hunter. The wind in Ijirima was not just a movement of air, it carried secrets, hushed voices, and stories the earth never dared speak aloud. Amina had always listened to the wind. But now, something had changed. Ever since she found the blood-soaked fabric beneath Baba Gubra's bed, the wind didn't just rustle leaves, it whispered names, sighed warnings, and carried riddles that twisted around her ears like tendrils of smoke. It started when she was near the old well behind the house, the one no one used anymore. People said the water had turned bitter, cursed by something long buried. The grass around it grew wild, and most villagers avoided it. But Amina, always crawling low, always invisible, often ended up nearby. And one morning, while trying to escape Baba Gubra's anger, she crouched behind the well and heard it, the voice. Faint. Female. Echoing. Amina. She froze. Her heart thudded. Amina. The wind blew again, and she thought it must be her mind playing tricks. But then it came once more, softer, like a memory. She danced in chains, and the chains sang. The voice faded with the breeze. Amina crawled back inside, too shaken to eat even if she'd found food. That night, she whispered to the moon again, but this time, it didn't feel like she was alone in the conversation. Days passed. More whispers came, not daily, but enough to make her wonder if something beyond her pain was trying to reach her. Then came the flashbacks. It wasn't dreams, no. It was her mind remembering things she had long pushed into the corners of her childhood. She remembered being even younger, perhaps 4 or 5, standing in the corner of the compound, watching an argument. A woman's voice, familiar, but not her mother's, shouting. Baba Gubra yelling back. A slam. A scream muffled by fabric. And then, nothing. That memory had vanished until now. Later, she heard a villager mention that Baba Gubra had been married before Halima. That woman disappeared, they said quietly, but he's had bad luck since. No one had ever questioned it. In Ijirima, men didn't owe explanations, and women vanished like mist. The whispers grew stronger. She knew she had to talk to someone. But not just anyone. Certainly not someone who feared Baba Gubra. That's when she met Nana Fatty. Nana Fatty was a blind old woman who lived at the edge of Ijurima, in a crooked hut held up by vines and prayer. She was said to be mad, or maybe wise, depending on who you asked. Children were warned not to play near her home. But Amina, small and silent as a cat, had followed the sound of a flute one evening and found her sitting cross-legged under a dying baobab tree, humming. She hadn't planned to speak. But Nana Fatty turned her white eyes toward her and smiled as if she'd been expecting her all along. "You crawl like the earth belongs to someone else," the old woman said. "Why do you give your knees to the dirt?" Amina opened her mouth, but no words came. Nana Fatty didn't need them. She patted the ground beside her. Amina sat. They didn't talk much that first day. Just sat. But before Amina left, the woman whispered, "Even chained queens can dance. But they must first learn where the chain begins." It stayed with her. That riddle. That strange truth. Amina began to notice more things after that. She watched Baba Gubra's movements with sharper eyes. She noticed how he avoided the barn after dark, how he kept the old key hidden in the same jar behind the kitchen herbs. One afternoon, when he was away at a village meeting, she took the key. The barn was old, its wood groaning like it remembered every injustice committed within. Dust danced in the light that filtered through cracks. She searched with trembling hands until she found it, an old wooden box pushed behind bales of dried cassava. She pulled it free, pried it open, and stared. Inside were things that didn't belong in a barn. A shawl. A pair of leather shoes. A journal, wrapped in worn cloth. And at the bottom, a ring, silver, delicate, with a symbol she'd seen only once in a worn storybook someone left at the market. A lion's head with a broken crown. The initials etched into it were QH, and suddenly, the journal made sense. She flipped through the pages. It was her mother's handwriting. In between recipes and memories were entries filled with grief and fear. Her mother wrote about marrying Baba Gubra to hide, to escape persecution. She had been the last daughter of Queen Halima of the Bakin Sarayuta dynasty, a small kingdom that had been overthrown decades ago. Her mother had survived the massacre. She had hidden her identity, even as she gave birth to Amina. Amina sat there, in the dirt, the journal trembling in her hands. She wasn't just a girl who crawled for food. She was the daughter of a queen. A rightful heir to a throne forgotten by time. Her heart beat louder than the silence in the barn. The whispers in the wind weren't lies, they were calling her home. Back to a history she didn't even know she carried in her blood. But fate is never kind when one dares to rise. That night, Baba Gubra returned early. Too early. Amina was still reading by the kitchen fire, journal in her lap. She didn't hear him enter until it was too late. He snatched the journal from her hands with a roar. She screamed and lunged, trying to grab it back. He struck her across the face, sending her sprawling. Then he lit a match. "No," she cried, crawling forward, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please, no." But he didn't stop. He threw the journal into the flames. It curled and blackened, the words of her mother eaten by fire. Then he dragged her by the arm to the corner of the kitchen, where an old iron pole stood. Once used to tie goats. Now it would tie her. He wrapped a rusted chain around her waist and locked it tight. The metal bit into her skin. "You think you can rise?" he whispered, his breath hot with rage. "You were born to crawl. And crawl you will." He turned and walked away, the sound of his steps echoing with finality. Amina sat chained to the pole, staring at the glowing embers of her mother's journal, her wrists raw, her dreams turning to ash. But deep inside her, something had changed. She wasn't crying. She was listening. And the wind outside was still whispering her name. The night Amina was chained to the kitchen pole, something inside her broke, but not in the way Baba Gubra had hoped. It wasn't the shattering of her spirit. It was the splitting open of something ancient, something buried beneath layers of pain and silence. The fire that had consumed her mother's journal had not consumed the memories etched into her mind. Every page she had read, every rune, every whispered word from Nana Fatty, had been carved deep into her. She did not weep. She did not scream. She scratched symbols into the packed earth floor using her fingernails, drawing runes her mother once wrote, each line trembling with a strange energy. She didn't know what they meant. But she knew they mattered. When Baba Gubra slept, she stayed awake and let the moonlight touch her skin. She imagined it was her mother's hand. She whispered to the darkness, not begging for freedom, but reciting ancient words from her dreams. They were not in any tongue she'd heard, but they came to her like breath, like heartbeat. And then the dreams began. Not dreams of escape. She didn't see herself running away. No, she saw herself standing tall, her hair braided with gold thread, her eyes fierce like twin suns. In her dreams, she did not crawl, she stood at the head of armies. She broke chains not with strength, but with words. She walked through fire and came out unburned. She wore a crown forged of flame and spoke in a voice that could stop storms. Each morning, she woke in the same kitchen, chained. But her heart was different. Steady. Waiting. The villagers began to talk. It started with the animals. Goats refused to enter Baba Gubra's compound. Chickens squawked wildly near the fence and ran away. A hunter's dog went missing for 3 days and was found staring blankly at the gate, tail between its legs, teeth clenched shut. Then the shadows began to misbehave. At dusk, some claimed to see movements near the house even when no one was outside. Children who played too close came back pale, swearing they heard a voice humming lullabies near the well. Women whispered during market hours, "He must have cursed someone," or, "That girl, she's still alive in there, right?" But no one dared question Baba Gubra aloud. Inside, Amina noticed changes in herself. When she looked at her reflection in the water pot, her eyes didn't seem brown anymore. Under the moonlight, a golden tint flashed in her pupils, like the sun was hiding inside her. One evening, when she cried softly into her knees, a crow landed on the kitchen window. Then another. Then 3 more. They didn't caw. They watched her silently, heads tilted. She exhaled shakily, and they flew away together like a wave, as if carried by her breath. The small wound on her wrist from the chain's rust healed overnight. Something was waking inside her. She had no name for it, but Nana Fatty did. "You are awakening," the blind woman said during one of Amina's rare escapes, when Baba Gubra was away, and she managed to crawl, chained, all the way to the baobab tree. Nana Fatty reached for her blindly, and her fingers touched the air as though she could feel the aura changing. "Your blood remembers what this village has forgotten," she murmured. "But child, be careful. Power without purpose is poison. And you are not ready yet." Amina held her silence, though questions burned on her tongue. She didn't know how to be ready. All she knew was that every day, the fire inside her grew stronger, even if she said nothing. But Baba Gubra noticed too. He noticed how her bruises faded quicker, how her stare had changed. Once, when he struck her across the cheek, she didn't cry. She didn't wince. She just looked at him. Long and steady. As if daring him to keep going. And something in him recoiled. He became more paranoid. He started sleeping with a knife under his pillow. He muttered to himself, staring at corners where shadows lingered too long. The animals avoided him. His dreams turned to nightmares. And one night, in his madness, he acted. He dragged her out into the yard while the stars watched. A full moon hung heavy in the sky, like an eye refusing to blink. He said nothing as he pulled her by the chain toward the back of the compound where a shallow hole had already been dug, a pit barely big enough for a child. She tried to scream, but his hands were too strong. He threw her in, kicked dirt over her legs, and whispered, "This is where dogs like you belong." He left her there. But the wind didn't leave her. Neither did the whispers. She clawed and clawed through the dirt, her nails breaking, her skin tearing, but the fire in her veins pushed her forward. The crows gathered above her head, cawing wildly. And by morning, her bloodied fingers broke the surface. She crawled out of the grave Baba Gubra made for her. And then, she went home. She entered through the back door, dragging her chain behind her, her body trembling from exhaustion. Baba Gubra stood frozen as she appeared before him, mud-streaked, bloody, alive. Alive. And silent. She didn't speak. She just looked at him with eyes that flashed gold for the briefest moment. He slapped her across the face. Hard. But this time, she didn't fall. She turned away and sat quietly near the fire, the chain clinking softly behind her like a forgotten relic. That night, as the stars wheeled overhead and the crows circled the compound silently, the chain on her wrist began to rattle. There was no hand, no key, no tool. And yet, the chain fell off. It didn't break. It didn't snap. It simply uncoiled, like a serpent finished with its prey. Amina touched her bare wrist. Then she looked toward the door. She wasn't free yet. But the fire beneath her ashes was awake. Amina no longer crawled. She did not run, nor stride boldly like a warrior. Instead, she moved slowly, deliberately, her bare feet silent but firm, like the echo of something that once walked in palaces. The silence of her steps unsettled the air around her. She did not shrink anymore, and though she still wore the same tattered rags, they hung differently on her now. Not like a slave's chains, but like a queen's mourning cloth. Villagers began to notice. When she stepped outside Baba Gubra's compound, people turned their heads. Some whispered blessings, others crossed themselves in fear. The elders watched from afar, their eyes narrowed with confusion. The children no longer called her mad or pitiful. They just watched. Wide-eyed. Unblinking. And Baba Gubra? He saw it too. He watched her glide silently past him in the mornings, carrying firewood with hands no longer trembling. He shouted at her, cursed her, even raised his fists, but she never flinched. It was like striking a ghost. She didn't speak. She didn't run. She just stared, calm and eternal, and it made the blood in his veins freeze. So he went to the village chief. "She's not right," he said. "The girl walks with devils. She mutters to the wind. Animals follow her. The shadows bend around her, have you not seen it?" But the chief raised an eyebrow and said, "You beat the girl too much, Gubra. Maybe now the spirits protect her." "No, she's cursed," Gubra spat, his voice trembling. "She's dangerous." The chief only sighed. "You should pray, not accuse. The gods don't like frightened men pointing fingers." Baba Gubra stormed off, but fear festered in him like rot. Because deep down, he knew this was no longer the girl he had broken. This was something else. That night, Amina returned to Nana Fatty's hut on the edge of the village. The air around the old woman shimmered with the scent of firewood, herbs, and ancient things. Nana Fatty, blind yet all-seeing, smiled as soon as Amina stepped into the circle of her presence. "You walk like her now," she said. "Like the Queen of Chains." Amina knelt, curious. "Who is she?" Nana Fatty touched her forehead gently. "A woman from long before this village stood. Born a slave, but with blood of fire. Chained to a king's table, fed like a dog. But inside her was a throne too large to kneel. She didn't escape. She rose. Made the chains her crown. Made fire her language." "Is she in me?" Amina asked. "She is you," Nana Fatty whispered. "And now, your training begins." Under Nana Fatty's guidance, Amina began to shape her awakening. Not with spells or rituals, but with silence, focus, and the sharpening of her pain. She sat by the wind and listened, not with her ears, but her spirit. She stared at fire until the flames bent sideways, licking in patterns she chose. She pressed her palm against hot coal, not to burn, but to understand. Pain, she learned, was not always an enemy. It could be a teacher. It could be power. Nana Fatty taught her to chant the names of her foremothers, to braid strength into her hair, to speak with her breath, not her tongue. Each night, Amina grew less like the girl she once was, and more like a shadow of the Queen of Chains. Sometimes she dreamed of past lives, sometimes she dreamed of futures soaked in blood and gold. The villagers felt the change. When Amina passed, fires flickered oddly in their hearths. The wind paused. The crows always followed. Some people began to bow their heads. Others locked their doors. The whispers grew louder. Gubra's girl walks with the old ones. She is not cursed, she is chosen. Baba Gubra grew desperate. He began burning everything left of Amina's mother. Her old shawl, her bead necklace, the herbs she once used to perfume her hair. He destroyed the last mirror in the house, smashed pots she had touched, even tore apart her wedding dress with a knife, cursing her memory with each shred. But the past is not easily buried. Amina, now half fire and half silence, uncovered more truths, through dreams, through Nana Fatty, through remnants the fire couldn't consume. Her mother hadn't died in childbirth. She had been poisoned. Nana Fatty confirmed it with a nod as solemn as a grave. He wanted her gone. She had royal blood. You were the price he was after. If he couldn't be king, he could chain the queen's daughter like a mutt. But some thrones burn hotter when buried. It was then Amina knew. All her suffering, her crawling, the hunger and bruises, had been by design. A plan. A murder. A theft. The girl who once crawled for food now stood on the ashes of betrayal. She waited no longer. One morning, as the sky was still yawning into sunrise, Amina walked out into the village square. The same villagers who once looked away now watched closely. She stood in her rags, the crows perched silently behind her, the wind circling her ankles like a pet dog. She raised her voice for the first time in weeks, maybe months. "You made me crawl," she said, turning toward the direction of her home, of Baba Gubra, of the man who had stolen everything. Her voice cracked like thunder. "Now watch me rise." And somewhere behind her, the air shifted. The ground beneath Baba Gubra's feet, as he stood inside his compound boiling millet, cracked slightly. Not loud. Just enough for him to pause and look down. The earth had split, not in a line, but in a spiral. Thin and ominous. He stepped back. The wind blew through his compound like a warning. And in the distance, Amina turned and began to walk. Slowly. Quietly. But no longer broken. The air in Ijurima had grown heavy. Whispers carried faster than footsteps. Eyes followed Amina wherever she went, some in fear, some in awe, others in confusion. But she no longer avoided their stares. Her silence had ended. Now, her voice rose, one truth at a time, like stones thrown into still water, disrupting everything. She stood in the village square and spoke of the night she found the blood-soaked fabric beneath Baba Gubra's bed. She told them of the whispers in the wind, the journal he burned, the chains that fell without touch. She did not beg. She did not cry. She simply told them what they had refused to see. "He is not a father," she said, "but a monster wrapped in a man's skin." The village murmured. Some, especially the older women, cast down their eyes, remembering how they'd seen her crawl, how they'd heard her whimpers at night and done nothing. But others, those close to Baba Gubra, men who owed him favors, and women who feared their husbands, called her mad. A witch. A liar poisoned by grief. Amina didn't stop. One morning before the market opened, she approached the village chief in secret. She carried an old, rotting leather satchel she had dug up from beneath the barn, the same barn where her mother's belongings had been found. Inside was a ledger, brittle with time, its pages yellow and cracked, but the ink still dark. Bribes. Names. Dates. And worse, records of two missing children, Isa and Temi, both orphans who had vanished years ago after whispering that Baba Gubra had the devil's box buried in his yard. The ledger detailed how he had paid the guards to look away, and how he offered silence fees to the families. The chief's face changed as he read. His lips went pale. His hands shook slightly. But fear, the kind that lives in old men, settled in his bones. He is still powerful, the chief whispered. Too many owe him. If I stand alone, he'll crush me. Then don't stand at all, Amina replied, her voice calm. But don't say you didn't see the truth. Word spread like wildfire, but instead of justice, chaos came. Baba Gubra, sensing his grip slipping, moved fast. He appeared before the village council, a self-made storm of grief and outrage. She's a witch, he shouted. She sings to birds and walks without pain. She curses our land with her lies. She has no family, no blood but cursed blood. Her mother was a harlot of the old tribes, her father unknown. And now she poisons your minds. The council, many of them in his debt, nodded. Murmured. The crowd, stirred by fear and old superstition, demanded punishment. She must be cleansed. Burn her. She speaks with the dead. They dragged Amina to the square where market stalls had been pulled aside. A wooden pole had been driven into the ground. Firewood stacked like a hungry beast around its base. The crowd circled in silence. The chief said nothing. Even those who doubted her did not speak. Fear turned hearts to stone. Amina stood tall, her wrists bound to the post. She looked at the faces that once smiled at her mother. At the women who'd watched her bleed and crawl. At the men who'd offered Baba Gubra respect without question. She did not scream. She did not cry. Instead, she sang. A low, haunting song, just 3 lines, one her mother used to hum at night, barely above a whisper. It was a lullaby from a forgotten time, sung by royal women to their daughters on the eve of battle. The melody coiled through the wind like smoke. And the air turned cold. The fire, eager just moments before, flickered and hesitated. The villagers stepped back. Then lightning split the sky in a scream of white, striking the pole before the flames could reach her. The sound cracked the heavens. The pole shattered. Smoke erupted. Dust flew into their eyes. Amina remained unharmed. The earth beneath the square rumbled. The wind howled. From the edge of the crowd, a figure emerged. Slow. Crooked. Wrapped in cloth and age. Nana Fati. Her blind eyes glowed with knowledge older than stone. She raised her staff and called out, "She is the queen in chains. She who crawled through hell and bled in silence. She is the daughter of the last light. Break her, and this land falls to shadow." The crowd stood frozen, their fear now something deeper. The kind of fear that sits behind the ribs and whispers of curses that cannot be undone. The ropes around Amina's wrists fell as if sliced by air. No one moved. She stepped down from the ashes barefoot, the smoke swirling behind her like a veil. Her eyes glinted gold. Her breath steamed in the warm air. And she walked. Through the crowd. Through the silence. And not a single hand rose to stop her. By nightfall, the village trembled in silence. Baba Gubra locked every door in his compound, stuffed cloth in the cracks, lit every lantern he had. He cursed the lightning. The old gods. The girl. Then he heard them. A flutter. A scraping. He turned and saw the crows. Dozens of them. On the roof. On the floor. Tearing through his millet. Pecking at his dried meat. Clawing at his bedding. Their black feathers filled the room like smoke, their eyes watching, unblinking. He shouted. Threw his staff. Swung a blade. But the crows would not leave. Amina had once called them with her breath. Now they answered without request. And Baba Gubra, once the man no one dared defy, stood in the middle of his house, surrounded by the darkness he had sown, realizing. The queen in chains had risen. And she had not forgotten. The whispers of the forest had changed. No longer whispers of fear or confusion, but voices guiding Amina toward a place long buried in story, spoken only in her mother's bedtime tales, the kind told when the night was thick and only the moon listened. Amina walked alone, past the edge of Ijurima, where the trees grew wild and the ground pulsed with silence. Each step felt familiar, as though her feet remembered a path her mind had never known. The wind carried fragments of old songs, lullabies sung by women who no longer lived, their echoes wrapped in the rustling leaves. Amina followed. Days passed. She ate little, slept beneath trees, and kept the ring with royal initials tight around her finger. In her dreams, her mother's voice returned, softer now, no longer in warning but in encouragement. "The throne lies beneath the earth," she had said once. "Where the first queen wept her last tear." Amina found the place by accident, or perhaps by fate. A clearing hidden behind thick thorns. In its center, an old termite mound crumbled to reveal a stone staircase spiraling into darkness. No snakes or spiders stirred there, as if even they respected what lay below. She descended with only the fire in her palm to light the way. The air thickened. The silence grew. Then, she saw it. A vast underground chamber carved from red stone, its walls painted with murals of women in chains, but standing, not kneeling. One mural showed a woman bearing a child beneath a tree of bones. Another showed a young girl placing a crown upon her own head. And in the center of the chamber, a stone throne, cracked but defiant, stood surrounded by roots that glowed faintly. At its base, wrapped in a decaying ceremonial cloth, were bones. Beside them, a crown, simple yet heavy with history. A scroll lay rolled near the remains, untouched by time. Amina knelt, her heart pounding. The scroll named her in a language she barely remembered but somehow understood. It told of the last queen of the forest clans, betrayed by her own blood and forced into hiding. Her daughter, Amina's mother, had escaped with her life but left the crown behind, fearing its curse. Now, her granddaughter had returned. Suddenly, the chamber filled with light, not from torches, but from spirits. They rose from the walls, from the floor, from the dust in the air. Women of every age, cloaked in fire and memory. Their eyes glowed. Their mouths did not move, but Amina heard them. "You are the return. The forgotten remembered. Rise, Queen of Chains." Then came the ritual. Amina felt the fire begin in her chest. She was led, wordlessly, through a narrow tunnel, where hot coals lined the ground. Her feet bled. Her scars opened. Her breath shortened. But she did not stop. They painted her in ashen oil, symbols etched across her arms and back. She bit her tongue to keep from screaming. The pain did not leave her, it became her. She placed the crown upon her own head, its weight pulling her spine straighter. Her bones no longer felt like a child's. When she emerged, her clothing had changed. Made of bark, stitched with bone, and lined with vines that pulsed faintly with life. Her crown was no longer dusty, it gleamed, though no sun reached this place. Her eyes had turned entirely gold. She walked out of the forest different. Not taller. Not older. But deeper, like a river that had found its bed. She returned to Ijurima just as the sun began to fall. The villagers gathered, wordless. None dared speak. Even the birds went silent. She no longer walked like a girl who had suffered. She walked like the storm that comes after drought. Her voice carried differently now, twice layered. Her own, and another deeper, older, resonating behind it like a drumbeat from the bones of time. "I am not your orphan," she said. "I am not your broken child. I am the queen who remembers. The one you tried to forget." She didn't seek the elders or the chief. She went instead to the women, the ones with scars hidden beneath cloth. The widows. The women whose sons had vanished under Baba Gubra's watch. The girls who whispered to each other in corners. And the boys who had seen too much violence in too few years. They came to her, hesitant at first, then in streams. Nana Fatty stood beside her, her old fingers gripping a new staff carved from the roots of the throne's chamber. "The world is changing," she whispered. It changes for those who listen. Amina taught them what she had learned, not spells or chants, but strength. They sat in circles, listened to wind, learned how to find silence in themselves. She reminded them they were not weak because they were cast aside. They were powerful because they had survived. And still, Baba Gabra tried to hold on. He sent one of his most loyal guards, a man who had once tied Amina's arms too tight when she was barely 10, to ambush her outside the village well. She didn't move as he charged. His blade struck fast and sure. But the moment it neared her skin, it screamed, a metallic shriek, and melted in his hands, the steel turning into a puddle of black sludge that soaked into the earth. The guard stumbled backward in shock, falling to his knees. She looked at him and said nothing. The air grew cold. The crows circled again. And the people of Ijirima finally began to believe the truth whispered for generations. The queen in chains had risen. And she was building a kingdom not of palaces, but of people who had once crawled. The morning dawned thick with unease. Even the birds, usually loud at first light, sang cautiously, as though warning of something not yet seen. A cloud hung above Ijirima, a dark, heavy mass that seemed to breathe with the land itself. People moved slower, whispered more, kept their children close. Something was coming. Not just the promise of rain, but a reckoning. Baba Gabra stood at the center of the village square, flanked by the few loyal men he still had. His eyes were wild, his clothes torn, and he held a torch as if it were a scepter. "You will obey," he shouted, spitting on the ground. "You will choose me or lose everything. I will burn this village to ash if that cursed girl breathes here another night." The crowd shifted. Fear flickered in their eyes, but so did something else, uncertainty, perhaps even guilt. The kind that had been building over years of silence. Then, one of the elders stepped forward. Old Dogo, bent by age but firm in voice. "Enough," he said. "No more threats. No more lies. I was there the night your first wife disappeared. I saw the blood on your hands." Gasps broke the tension like snapped branches. Another elder joined him. Then a woman, her eyes wet but her voice steady. "You made us hide your sins. We swallowed our tongues for peace. But peace built on pain is not peace. It is rot." The crowd murmured, old wounds stirring. And then, through the dust that swirled in the square, Amina appeared. She did not walk like the girl who once crawled. She moved with silence, with grace, as if the air parted for her. Her crown of vines and gold gleamed faintly even under the clouded sky. Her cloak fluttered not with wind, but with presence. Children who had been taught to avoid her now followed her barefoot, like small stars orbiting a rising moon. Amina stepped to the center and raised her hand. Silence fell instantly. "I was not born in chains," she said, her voice calm and clear. "I was thrown into them." Eyes locked on her, even those who had whispered against her. "He made me crawl. He beat me for eating. He silenced my mother with poison. He tried to bury me alive." She lifted her sleeve, showing the old chain marks on her wrists. "But I rose." As she spoke, the sky dimmed. Not with night, but with something older. A golden wind swept across the square, warm and pulsing, and thousands of fireflies appeared, drawn to her body. They landed gently on her shoulders, arms, and face, glowing like small blessings. Her hair lifted slightly, as though the wind respected her more than the man who called himself ruler. "Every lie you buried beneath fear," she continued, "has grown roots. And now they crack the very ground you walk on." Baba Gabra laughed once, loud and bitter. "You're a witch," he screamed. "Nothing more than a cursed brat with tricks." He rushed toward her, hand raised for one final strike. Time slowed. The villagers held their breath. And just as his fingers reached for her, his hand turned gray. Cracks spiderwebbed up his wrist. A sound like wind through dry leaves followed. His hand crumbled to ash midair, scattering to the ground in soft, harmless dust. He stared at the stump, mouth open in horror. No one moved. No one dared. Amina did not flinch. That was not vengeance, she said. That was balance. The chief, who had once remained neutral, stepped forward, eyes wide with fear and reverence. What are you?" he whispered. She looked at him, not above, not below, but directly. "I am what happens when silence finds a voice. When chains break not just from wrists, but from generations. I am the queen of the land beneath and above. Born in pain. Risen in power." The people, one by one, fell to their knees. Not from fear. From recognition. Even those who once doubted her now wept openly. They had seen the truth. Not just in the magic, but in her scars. The proof of every bruise they ignored. The weight of every cry they let pass. And then, she turned to Baba Gubra. He was kneeling now, his body weakening, his mouth trembling. No longer the feared man, but a hollow shell of tyranny. "You threw me into a pit," she said quietly. "Not to punish me, but to erase me." She raised her hand. From the edge of the village, crows rose, not in fear, but in obedience. A group of silent women and men, the same ones he had once cast aside, carried Baba Gubra, not violently, but firmly. He struggled, but it was useless. The pit still existed. The one he dug in secret. The one Amina had once clawed her way out of with torn hands and broken hope. They lowered him in gently. No words. No vengeance. Just burial, not in the earth, but in the shame he once used to feed his power. Amina stood at its edge, not with satisfaction, but with solemnity. "This is not justice," she said. "This is remembering." The clouds parted slightly above, revealing a golden hue, not sunlight, but something older, softer, eternal. And with that, the storm broke, but it brought no destruction. Only rain. Rain that cleansed the village, soaked the ashes, filled the pit, and softened the soil where silence had once ruled. The people wept freely, not from sorrow, but release. And Amina, the queen once chained, walked back into the village, her crown glistening, her fireflies still dancing, and 1,000 silent voices rising in song. Amina's reign was unlike any that came before her. The village, once stifled by fear and the weight of unspoken laws, now thrived in the light of change. There was a sense of purpose in the air, a hum of hope that the people had not known for generations. Her rule was not one of brutality or domination. She understood pain better than anyone, and with it, she built a kingdom of empathy. She knew that true power was not derived from the fear of others, but from lifting them up, ensuring that every voice, no matter how quiet, was heard. She created a council of crawlers, a group made up of those who had once been silenced or oppressed. Women who had been ignored, children who had been abandoned, and elders who had been dismissed, all were given the opportunity to speak and guide the village in ways they never had before. Amina, as their queen, was no longer alone in her thoughts. The council reflected the diversity of those who had once been overlooked, giving them a seat at the table where decisions were made. Her laws were simple, but powerful. They were based on compassion, with an emphasis on protecting the vulnerable. The law punished those who hurt others, particularly those who sought to oppress or silence the weak. But it also celebrated those who acted in defense of the defenseless. Amina knew that kindness was not a weakness, it was the foundation of strength. But no matter how far she rose, Amina never forgot the crawl. Every morning, as the sun broke over the horizon, she would walk to the edge of the village, where the land met the forest. There, in the quiet, she would take off her crown of gold and place it on the ground beside her. Instead of wearing the symbol of her royalty, she wore the iron chain around her neck. It was a constant reminder of what she had endured and what she had conquered. The chain, cold and heavy against her skin, represented every moment of pain, every injustice, and every time she had been forced to crawl. It was a part of her. And though she had risen, she knew that her strength came not from forgetting the crawl, but from embracing it. Meanwhile, Baba Gubra, once the man who had held the village in his grip, was now a shadow of his former self. Broken, mad, and without a shred of power, he spent his days in the pit he had once dug for Amina. He muttered to himself constantly, whispering, "She wasn't supposed to rise. She wasn't supposed to be more than what I made her." But Amina did rise. And she became the ruler of not just the village, but of a new realm of understanding, a place where fear was replaced with trust, and oppression was replaced with freedom. One day, Amina walked to the pit where Baba Gubra lay, his eyes wild and his body frail. He looked up at her, his gaze filled with a mix of disbelief and hatred. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Amina stood above him, her golden crown shining, her eyes unwavering. "You made me crawl," she said softly. "You fed me like an animal. But now, I feed kingdoms." She paused, letting her words sink into the earth around them. There was no anger in her voice, no vengeance. Just truth. Without another word, she turned and walked away. As she did, the earth beneath her feet seemed to bloom. Flowers sprouted in her wake, and the soil softened where her footsteps had been. She was a queen not just by title, but by the strength she had found in her own scars. Back in the village, a painting was being created. It would hang in the new palace, a reminder of the girl who had once been broken but who had become unbreakable. The image was simple, a girl on her knees, a crown above her, and fire rising behind her. The fire was not one of destruction, but of rebirth. The girl on her knees was Amina, before she rose, before the world knew her as a queen. But the fire, the crown, and the strength they symbolized were a testament to what she had become. The painting, simple yet powerful, was a reflection of her journey, of crawling through chains, of rising, and of leading with wisdom and compassion. As the painting was completed, the final line was etched into its frame. "Some queens are born in silk. Others crawl through chains to wear it." And so, Amina's reign began. The village flourished, the people thrived, and the memory of the girl who had crawled for food was woven into the very fabric of the land. For Amina had not just overcome her past, she had transformed it. Her chains were no longer a symbol of oppression, but of strength. And with that strength, she ruled, compassionate, wise, and unshakable. Her story, like the fire that rose behind her, would never be forgotten.